I have no plans to come to the States, Betty. There is nothing for me there anymore. There was a shocked silence on the other end. Betty was stunned. She had been so sure that Tom would want to come home now and bring the boys. She had never considered anything else. She didn't know what to say. Tom, you can't mean that. You have to bring the twins home to see their mother. She will be devastated if she can't see them. You can't do that to her. I didn't do anything, Betty. She did. Have you forgotten? I haven't, and the boys have gotten over her, so I don't plan on reminding them of something painful. Tom, please reconsider. She has to see the boys. It would help so much in her recovery if they were here. Please, Tom. I'm sorry, Betty. Give my regards to Harry. Good night. Tom hung up before Betty could say anything else. He wasn't ready for this and probably had never planned on her waking up in spite of what the doctors said. It had been almost 2 years, and he had just begun to move forward with his life. He was not going to make the mistake of going back to relive all of the pain and heartbreak. That part of his life was over. She dreamed of Tom. It was their first anniversary, and he had booked them a room for the night. He was there with her in the hotel room, and he was watching her as she stripped for him. She was teasing, and he was smiling at her. He moved with her to the bed and laid her back. She looked into the face she loved, expecting to see her love returned, but was suddenly frightened. What she saw was an angry face, and it was changing as she watched from her loving husband to Harris Templeton. His face was suddenly enveloped in fire, and she felt incredible pain. What was happening? What did the pain mean, and why would Tom change into Harris? She was suddenly very afraid and confused. She jolted awake, shaking, with heart pumping and breathing rapid and thready. She was disoriented for a moment until she calmed down. She was not sure what had just happened, but she knew she must have had a bad dream. She hugged herself as she quieted. A nurse came into the room and asked her what was wrong. She mentioned a bad dream, and the nurse came over with a warm cloth and wiped her face and talked softly to help her calm down. She was quiet now and fell back asleep as the nurse watched. Nikki slept through the rest of the night and looked much stronger by the next morning. She was beginning to eat some solid food, and her kidneys were functioning well. The nurse had taken her for a few steps, and she had wanted to sit in the chair for a while as she ate her breakfast. She also used the bathroom for the first time and felt much better once she had splashed some water on her face. She looked awful, but she was awake. Small steps. Her mother and father came in shortly after she had finished her breakfast, and they both exclaimed at how much better she looked. She had been walking around the room, and she paused, holding on to the bed rails. She didn't want to sit down. She smiled at them, but couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had been with her most of the morning. She listened as Betty and Harry talked about things and people and places, most of which she ignored, just enjoying the sound of their voices. She had been in a quiet place for so long that any sound was welcome. Her mind just drifted until they began to slow down. Mom, where are my husband and my children? You have been avoiding it now, and it is time you told me the truth. Nikki, I don't know if you are ready for too much more just yet. Why don't you wait until we can take you home? We'll tell you everything then, okay? I want to know right now, before you say anything else. Where is Tom, and why isn't he here? Why aren't Jason and Joshua here to see me? Honey, how much do you remember of what happened? Do you remember the accident at all? That was from her dad. The last thing I remember is Tom calling to say he was going to be late. I had dropped the twins off at your place, and suddenly a picture of Harris Templeton came unbidden into her head. He was naked and looking at her in a room somewhere. She saw his face in a mirror. She noticed that she was also naked. What the hell? She wiped her face with her hands, willing more to come. She concentrated on the room she was in, and suddenly it all came rushing back. She remembered everything, and with that memory, she staggered and fell to the floor, her father reaching for her futilely. She remembered, and the pain that came with that memory was more than she could bear. She fainted, falling into oblivion. It was now 2 weeks since Nikki had awakened. She was ready to come home, and Betty and Harry were there to pick her up. Harry pulled the car up to the front, and there was a small group of nurses and staff waiting to say goodbye to Nikki. After all, she had been there with them for almost 2 years, and they had all tended to her at one time or another. They were proud of her since they had taken care of her all that time to ensure that when she did wake, she would be in good health. As she was escorted out in the wheelchair, She smiled and shook hands and had a word for most of them. She was happy to be leaving, but would miss some of them greatly. She was quiet on the ride home, thinking of her life now. She was alone and had no one to share her life with. Her husband had left her, her children were taken from her and now living thousands of miles away, and she had nothing left worth living for. Most of her friends had moved on and some had died. She was more alone now than she had ever been, even with her parents. They couldn't help her now except for the physical, and that was pretty much back to normal. She thought again about Harris Templeton's death. It seemed strange that he would die in a robbery. She was told that his sister was living with him at the time, but was not there when he was murdered. Well, life was strange, but she could only remember her shock when she read the letter he had sent to Tom just before his death. Tom had given copies of it, and her letter to him to her parents before he left for Europe. In it, he had confessed to lying about Tom and admitted he had done it only as a way to lure her into sleeping with him. She felt cheated that she couldn't confront him for wrecking her life. That evening, as she was sitting in the family room staring off into space, Betty came in and sat down beside her. "How are you doing, dear? Isn't it good to finally be out of that dreary place and back in your own home? We're so glad to have you here with us." She patted Nikki's hand and smiled fondly at her. "This isn't my home, Mom. I love you and Daddy, but my home is gone, along with my husband and children. I lost everything I loved when Harris made me believe that Tom was cheating on me." She paused for a minute, thinking back. "Why did I believe him so quickly, Mom? What in the world was I thinking?" "Please don't talk like that, dear. You have your whole life ahead of you. Things will get better, and we can still try to get Tom to bring the twins here soon. I believe he will as soon as you are better." "I'm better now, Mom, and he already refused to bring them home to me. You know that, and so do I. He will never forgive me. I don't think he will ever let me see them until they are adults and can make their own decisions." Betty watched her daughter for some time before coming to a conclusion. She rose from the couch and walked over to the desk. From it, she took a manila envelope and brought it back to Nikki. She and Harry had discussed this, and Harry was in favor of giving it to Nikki from the very beginning, but she was not so sure. "This is from Tom. He left it by your bedside on the day he left for Belgium. It was marked for you, only so we never opened it. I think it's time you read it, and maybe it will give you some hope." With that, she rose and left Nikki alone with the envelope. Nikki just stared at it for a long time. She looked at her name, written in Tom's scrawl. Why would Tom write a letter instead of talking to her face to face? Didn't she deserve at least that much from him? As her anger began to build, she suddenly remembered that she had done exactly this to Tom. She had left him a letter instead of asking him for the truth. She had written a letter designed only to hurt, a dagger to his heart. This was what she deserved, no more. She was torn with curiosity to know what Tom was thinking when he finally left her. She wanted to know, but at the same time, she was afraid to know. She finally went into her bedroom and shut the door. She got a drink of water and came back and sat on the edge of the bed and, with shaking hands, opened the manila envelope. Inside, she found a plain white envelope sealed with a sticker like the twins used to use on everything. When she saw the elephant sticker, she broke down and cried. It represented everything she had lost. She cried for almost an hour before finally getting herself under some control. She had not cried like that since she awakened. She opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Nikki, by now, you will know that the boys and I have gone to Europe to begin a new life. The twins and I will be living in Brussels, Belgium, and I am now Vice President for European Operations. It is what I was working for and why I spent so many hours away from you. It was to have been our most exciting adventure, you and I and the twins on a new continent. We could have been so happy, but it was not to be. You may wonder why I left you and divorced you, even though I know that you and Harris actually did nothing that day in the hotel. You deserve to know, and I will try to tell you. I spoke with Harris after he left the hospital, and he told me that you said that you couldn't cheat on me regardless of what I had done. I'm glad for your sake. He also told me that the accident occurred because you wanted to get home to remove the letter you wrote. He admitted he was also anxious to get the letter to stop me from finding out his part in the deception. After that one conversation, he and I parted and I never spoke to him again. He was gone later, struck down by evil. You may also know that I invited Shelley into my home to help care for the house and the children. It was done initially to help Shelley after Harris's death, but it grew into deep affection and she shared my bed. In the end, we both knew that we shared only a fondness for each other and happy memories, but not love. I offered to take her with me, but she refused. Now as to why I divorced you. You believed the story Harris told you about my infidelity. You accepted his word and never asked me if it were true. You believed it was possible that I could do that to you and to our life together. That lack of trust in me was the worst thing that I could imagine. The pain that brought to me was more than I would have believed. I never thought it was possible to love someone without trusting them, but that's exactly what you did. You said you loved me but didn't trust me. Therefore, I must believe that you never truly loved me. Love without trust is not a marriage. It is a sham. I couldn't continue in a marriage without trust. It may be hard for some to understand this, but you are one of the few people who know my background and know that I consider trust to be one of the most important things in my life. More important to me in many ways than love. I trusted you completely, and I loved you totally, but you didn't share that love and trust. I have made sure that you will be taken care of until you recover. Your parents are good people, and I know they will make all the right decisions in your care. When you are better, you will find the proceeds from the sale of the house are yours, and you will have a monthly check that should take care of most of your needs. I wish you the best and hope for your recovery. I ask that you not try to contact the boys when you wake since they have a hard time learning to live without you. By the time you read this, it may be they will have forgotten you. For their sakes, I will hope. Goodbye, Nikki. Tom. As Nikki read the last part of the letter, she felt very little. It was as if she were watching from a distance, as the room around her began to fade. She saw the letter drop to the floor, and she watched as she walked into the bathroom. She watched the door close and then, nothing. By the time Harry found Nikki, she had almost succeeded in her attempt to end it. After reading the letter, she had gone into the bathroom. She was very careful to lock the door and make no sound. She had filled the tub with water before slipping in. She tried to do it right, but Betty had been worried about what the letter might contain and had Harry check on her. He had found the locked door and knew something was wrong when she didn't answer his knocks. He broke open the door and found her. The 911 operator had the ambulance there in no time. They knew exactly what to do and were not bothered by what they found since it was actually fairly common in their experience. She was taken to emergency and sewn up. She was fine, except for the loss of blood, and the doctors began transfusions to build her pressure back up. She would live. Because it was an attempted, and with her parents' support, Nikki was confined to a mental hospital where she was forced into therapy. Her situation was not unusual to the therapist on staff, and she was very well versed in standard treatments. She treated it first as acute depression, and Nikki was put on medication while she attended therapy every day for a month. With the meds and the therapy, Nikki slowly began to find a way back to some semblance of normalcy. She was still unhappy, but she was finding ways to cope with it. She was released from the hospital 2 months after her aborted attempt. With continued therapy, Nikki began a slow recovery. The hardest part was learning to live without her little boys. She accepted Tom's condition that she not try to contact them even though she wanted desperately to see them. They were 3.5 years old now. At least she had the pictures that Tom sent to Betty. She kept them all and had each one pasted into the scrapbook she kept. In it, she had all of the pictures and letters that Tom had been sending, and she had clippings about the company that Tom headed in Europe. She kept the book always where she could look at it, and it did help to ease some of the loneliness. The pain was still there, but it began to ease, and she could sometimes go days before she remembered again. But time heals all wounds, and she slowly regained her stability. She still lived at home with her parents, but she was beginning to think about a future on her own. One thing she wanted was to go back to school. She wanted an advanced degree in psychology so that she could go into counseling. She had become fascinated with the counseling sessions she was forced into during recovery, and she vowed then that she would do something like that as soon as she could. She wanted to make a difference to others like herself. People who made bad choices and were trying to live with the consequences. She checked with Tom's lawyer and found that the trust fund Tom had set up using the proceeds from the sale of the house and the settlement from the insurance company were enough to pay for the small tuition at a local university. She told her parents what she was going to do, and they were supportive. With Betty's help, she found a small apartment just off campus, furnished it, and she moved in that month. Her new life had begun. Since she had a degree in psychology already, All she had to take were some advanced level courses in therapy and do some sessions with a practicing therapist. Her counselor told her that she could be finished in just about 2 years. After an apprentice program lasting 6 months, she would have her certificate and she could go into practice by herself or with someone else. She set up a schedule and program and began her college career. She was looking forward again for the first time in a long, dark time. She was on her own and she was going to make it. It was a promise she made to herself. Jason and Joshua ran up to their father and tried to tempt him back to the water. They were scuba diving in Moreton Bay off the north side of Australia and exploring the reefs, and it was truly something to see, but he was beginning to get tired and just wanted to rest and relax for a while. Not so for the twins. They simply couldn't get enough and they were off again. After all, it was the first time they had been away from their home in Belgium for over 3 years. They were 8 years old now and they were good, solid boys. He was so proud of them, and he often wondered how he had managed to raise such great kids alone. God knows he had his problems, but they seemed to have survived in spite of him and his stumbling ways. The boys were identical twins and looked so much alike that even he had trouble keeping them straight unless he was close enough to see the minute differences. They loved making trouble switching, but he was one of the few that could tell them apart, and they had stopped trying with him. Not so with others, however, and they were notorious at their school. All good clean fun though, so he was content. Their mother would be proud. At that thought, he angrily stood up and grabbed his gear and called the boys to get ready to go back to the Brisbane Marriott Hotel in their room. He was angry with himself. He had thought he was past that, but thinking about the boys and raising them alone brought painful memories back to the surface. Once in the room, he grabbed a beer from the cooler and dropped down into one of the cane chairs so popular in this resort. He reflected back on the past 6+ years and remembered. He remembered more now than before, and without the pain that he experienced earlier. He had received regular letters from Betty over the years, and she kept him informed of all that was going on. He in turn sent her pictures of the boys and told her of their progress in school. He never knew whether she showed the pictures or his letters to Nikki and never asked. He didn't want to know. He knew that Nikki had recovered from her coma and that she had attempted. He also knew that she had been confined for some time in a mental institution, but that she was released. He knew all of her battles and successes, her return to college for an advanced degree in psychology, and that she was now fairly successful in her career as a guidance counselor for teens in trouble. She would have been very good at that, he knew, and wondered how she was doing with her life. Betty had never mentioned a man, just as he had never told her of any of his ill-fated attempts at romance. He thought of Abby, the woman he had recently been dating, with pain. The breakup was hard and bitter. Nasty words were said, and it was like so many others over the last few years. He was unable to commit to a life with anyone. Betty didn't need to know that. It was better left unsaid. Too many painful memories there. For the 1000th time, he wondered if he should have taken the boys on a trip back to the States to meet their mother. Betty suggested it in every letter, and he declined in his. He had made no secret from the boys of the fact that she was alive and lived in his old hometown. He had simply told them that he and Nikki had separated and that she had a life of her own. They never tried to get him to take them to see her, and he never suggested it. Now, it was more important than before because he had a decision to make. Maybe he would bring the subject up with them. Maybe he had better investigate his own motives first. Was this for them or for him? He decided to bring it up tonight at dinner. They were staying at the Marriott in Brisbane, and it was a beautiful hotel. It faced the ocean and was a wonderful place for the boys. They could explore the beaches, grab a taxi and go into the city, and in general find something to do that would please 8-year-old boys. They were very independent, and he did not worry much about them, although he had hired a guide to be with them who was recommended to be very good with boys. Together, they were a match for most anybody. He was again proud of the way he had raised them. They decided to eat in the outdoor dining room, and they dressed casually. It was warm here in December, and they enjoyed the change from the weather in Belgium this time of year. They sat at a table away from the bulk of the room at their father's request. He had told them he wanted a family discussion. That meant either something very good or very bad, or so the boys equated it. As they finished their dinner and Tom had ordered coffee for himself and dessert for the boys, he looked at them sitting together. As usual, they dressed identically. They loved to do this and to confuse the staff of the hotel. They did it good-naturedly and only in fun. "Boys, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it and maybe talk to each other before you give me an answer. Can you do that? Sure, we can do that, Pop. Is it something good or something bad? It's always one or the other when we have these family discussions. I don't know how you are going to take what I have to ask you. I guess the best thing to do is just ask. How would you feel about going to the US to meet your mother and grandparents? The silence was deafening as the boys looked first at Tom and then at each other. It was only a few seconds, but to Tom, it felt like forever. As he watched, their faces changed and they both gave a whoop of joy almost at the same instant. Around the restaurant, faces turned their way and then back as they saw it was only boys laughing. Are you serious? Meet our mother and grandparents? You've got to be kidding. That's all we've thought about for the last 5 years. We were always told not to mention it to you because it made you sad and made you hurt. So we didn't, but we always wanted to. When can we go? Soon? Where does she live? Will she remember us? Can we go soon? They both talked together, finishing each other's sentences, alternating sentences, and in general making perfect sense. He never understood how they could do that. He had not thought of what he wanted them to say, but as they continued to talk aloud and express their excitement, he found himself smiling. Inside, he must have been thinking the same thing, and he found himself responding to their enthusiasm. They were going to do this. Before dinner was over, he had told them somewhat of their mother and grandparents. He told them they lived in a small town in California and that Nikki was a counselor to young people with problems. He told them of Betty and Harry and promised to let them see some of the letters she had written and some of the pictures she had sent. He had them all safely locked away, perhaps for this day. Dad, why did you and our mom break up? Why did you have to leave her when you took us away to Belgium? Can you please tell us now? We're old enough to know the truth. We never believed the story about the two of you just deciding to go different places. She wouldn't have given us up so easily, would she? It isn't true that she didn't want us, is it? Tom was surprised that they had this many questions. But then again, why wouldn't they? He had never talked much about what happened and just told them, when they asked about her when they were smaller, that they had just grown apart. He had told them that Nikki was too sick to care for them and agreed to let them come with him. He never let them see his hurt or his anger when he spoke of her, and he never blamed her for anything. She was sick, that's all he said. They finally stopped asking. Now, he took the time to tell them as much as he could about their mother and their grandparents and their home. He made sure they knew their mother had not deserted them and that she and their grandparents would welcome them and love them just as he did. They listened as he told them all he could, leaving out only the pain. After they returned to Belgium, Tom made some calls to arrange the trip back to the States. He hadn't discussed this with the boys, but he had been offered a major promotion to Executive VP of Operations worldwide, and it would mean relocating back to California. He wanted to make the trip more for that than anything else, to see if he really wanted to return home. He was pretty sure it was time. The trip was finalized and set for the second week February. The boys had their passports and all of their shots, and he had arranged with the school for time off. They were both good students, and he had no problem with the school. They were ready, of course, and couldn't wait. He had called Betty and Harry and told them of the trip plans, and Betty was beside herself. She said she would let Nikki know, and she cried on the phone as she heard all of the plans. Tom was pleased and let her talk to her grandsons for the first time. It was quite a call. Tom arranged for a corporate rental in Valencia, California, where they would be going. It was a small town, just off the 5 in a section called Santa Clarita Valley. There was an amusement park there, and it was where the headquarters was located. Since he planned on staying there for as long as 6 weeks, he thought the rental would be better for the boys. He had no idea of how Nikki lived, and he knew that Betty and Harry's home was very small, so this was the best solution. He gave the address to Betty on one of their calls, and she said she knew where it was. They were all set. The day came, the plane left, and they were on their way. They left at 6 a.m. and planned to stop in Newark before heading on to California. The trip would take about 12 hours, all told, and it promised to be very unpleasant. However, with the boys as excited as they were and his pleasure at watching them, the trip went faster than he expected. He was glad they had done this, and he found himself thinking more and more of Nikki. What would she look like now after almost 7 years? Would she look the same? She would be delighted to see the boys, but how would she feel about him? He had told her of Shelley, and his letter was bound to have hurt her. He knew that it was part of the reason she had tried to kill herself, and he was sorry about that. It was never his intention to cause her pain. He was just trying to explain to her. They arrived late that next night, and Harry met them at the airport. He said that Betty and Nikki wanted to wait until they had time to rest and clean up, and that tomorrow would be the day for reunion. Tom was just as happy that it could be delayed since everybody was tired and irritable. Not the best way to meet someone for the first time. Harry got them to the apartment, and it was more than satisfactory. They settled in and all fell asleep almost as soon as they touched the pillow. With jet lag, the next day arrived way too soon. The boys seemed to recover quickly, however, and after a shower, they were ready to go. He followed, and they went out to breakfast. During breakfast at a Denny's, Tom called Betty, and they made arrangements to meet at her place in an hour. Tom remembered quite well how to find it. Things had changed some, but he knew how to get there. Is she going to be there? Tom wanted to be prepared. Yes, she's here now and wants so much to see the boys. You can't imagine what this means to her, Tom. Yes, I can. You can't know what it means to me to see her. And I want to see her face when she sees the boys. She'll be proud, just like I am. As Tom hung up, he was surprised at his comments. He found that he was truly anxious to see Nikki, more so than he had ever imagined. He accepted his feelings, although he didn't fully understand them. He returned to his seat and waited till they were all finished. It was time to reunite their family. Nikki sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee forgotten in front of her. Her mind was in a whirl, and she couldn't seem to focus on her mother as she talked of the boys and what it would be like to see them. She tried to make sense of her feelings but couldn't. These were her sons, her boys, taken from her so many years ago. She didn't know what she felt. She had worked so hard to suppress all of her feelings for them so many years ago that she was afraid she had lost them entirely. She remembered the pain that was so intense at times that it threatened to consume her. She had forgotten in defense of her sanity. To remember and to not have them was too hard. She had let them go. Betty watched her daughter and could almost hear the thoughts going on in her head. She knew the pain and the loss and the fear that Nikki was experiencing right now. She had almost lost her daughter 6 years ago when she found out that she had lost her boys. She had witnessed her fight back to sanity and her struggle to live with what she had been given and what had been taken away. It was a battle that Nikki had fought long and hard and had finally won. Now, all that she had buried was about to be brought back into the light. She knew that Nikki was frightened, but she also knew that she would forget it all when she saw Jason and Joshua, her sons. Nikki shook her head and seemed to wake herself from a deep sleep. She looked at Betty and put a smile on her face. Whatever was going to be would be. She would do what she could do, and she would not struggle against what could not be. So she had learned during her recovery. When will they be here? Did Tom say what time? Nikki was as ready as she would ever be for this. She had never expected it to come, but now it was here. In about 30 minutes. They are on the way. They stopped for breakfast at Denny's over on McLeod Boulevard. Tom, Jason, and Joshua. Are you ready? As much as I can be. Will they remember me, Mom? Will they know who I am, and will they forgive me? They are your sons, Nikki, and they will know you. They have nothing to forgive because they are your sons, and they know you didn't let them go willingly. Don't you worry about that. They'll know. Oh, yes, they'll know. Betty smiled to herself. She knew what a mother knew. Blood would tell, and Nikki would see for herself. This was the last step in Nikki's return to the world. She had been working and existing and smiling and talking, but she had not been living. She had been waiting for this moment. The car pulled into the driveway, and the doors flew open to allow 2 anxious boys to pile out and look for their mother. They looked to the door just as Nikki opened it. They stopped and looked toward her for an eternity before Nikki ran down the steps to embrace the 2 boys now running toward her. They remembered. They knew her for who she was, and it was as if they had never parted. They embraced together, and they cried together, and the world was right again. Betty watched with tears in her eyes as the reunion took place. She had known it would be like this. A mother and her sons. A mother that could now heal completely, and sons that would grow up knowing both their mother and father. That was as it should be. Tom watched with a lump in his throat. He had been right to bring them home. They were where they should be, and he knew that he would make the move back home. He couldn't take this from them, ever again. He watched for a while, and then moved to embrace Betty and Harry. They were also watching, and they would wait their turn to meet their grandsons. This was more important. Thank you, Tom. This was the right thing to do, and I bless you for it. This will finish the healing that Nikki has fought for all these years. No, I should have done this long ago, but I guess I had some healing of my own to do. But they come first. Watching them, I know it is for the best. He decided to tell them first before Nikki and the boys. I have accepted a new position, and I will be relocating back here to Valencia permanently. We will be here from now on. He smiled at the look on Betty's face and accepted Harry's handshake and hug. Do they know? He asked. Not yet. I wanted to wait until they could take it in. I think that may be a while yet, don't you? The three were still holding each other, but were now talking and telling each other of secrets and wonders and sharing everything. Nikki was watching their faces in wonder, and she could not get enough. They were her sons. They were her sweet boys, lost for so long and now come home to her. She cried tears of happiness as she laughed in total joy. They laughed with her and shed tears of their own. They were home. It was much, much later, after the boys had met their grandma and grandpa, that Nikki and Tom had exchanged a polite hug of welcome and a quick search of the other's face for clues to their feelings. Questions were present on each face, but answers would wait. The day passed in joy and exploration and discovery, and dinner was shared. It was a day that each would remember forever. The boys tried valiantly to stay awake long into the night, but jet lag and fatigue took their toll, and they found a quiet place in the spare room to conk out. Betty and Harry stayed with Tom until they also feigned fatigue and retired to their bedroom. They encouraged Tom to just let the boys stay over if he chose to go back to the apartment. He agreed, and Betty smiled. Her grandsons in her house. Alone at last, Tom and Nikki sat at the kitchen table, and it was awkward at first. They looked at each other, waiting for the other to start. Neither knew what to say, and the silence stretched on until finally Tom spoke. I don't know whether Betty told you, but I am moving back to Valencia for good. I have taken a new position here. I haven't told the boys yet, but I wanted you to know that they will not be going back. They belong here with you. I know that now. Nikki watched as Tom spoke, and she found that he was as familiar to her now as he was before. It was as if he had never left. Yes, he was older and more mature. He was probably more handsome than he was when he was younger, and she was still moved by him. She could feel it deep down somewhere where the feelings had been dormant.
I'm glad, Tom.
I'm glad that you have done so well, and I'm especially glad that the boys will be here for me. I have missed them so much. I have worked so hard not to miss them, but I wasn't very successful. When I saw them today, it all came back. All the shame, all the pain, and all the guilt. But they washed it all away with their smiles and their hugs, and I felt such joy. I will be forever grateful to you. In his turn, Tom watched Nikki and wondered how he could have left her. He felt now as he had before all of the sadness and pain. He had never stopped loving her. It was clear to him now. He had left her when she couldn't stop him. That was the coward's way, and he had taken it then. Now, he saw it for what it was. I have so much to say to you, but the only thing that seems important is that I still love you as much as I did before. I have been miserable and lonely all these years, and now I understand why. I could never make a commitment to anyone else, and I didn't know why. Now I do. Tom said this calmly and with some surprise. It had come to him slowly during the day as he watched his family come together. It came to him as he realized over dinner that they were each, in their own way, complete now. And I love you, Tom. I always have and I always will. But I am not the same person that I was when you left. I am different, and you don't know me. I have not made time for anyone but myself since I recovered from the attempt. I have had to work so hard just to survive, and I have made a life for myself that hasn't had room for anyone else. Now I have my sons back, and I will learn to make room for them. That will be easy since they were never far away in my mind, and they never blamed me for not being there. But you, Tom, you are different. You told me that I lacked trust in you, and because of that, I didn't love you. But that wasn't true. I never stopped trusting you. I made a mistake believing Harris. It wasn't a lack of trust. It was simply a mistake made when I was feeling sorry for myself and encouraged by a selfish man that only wanted to have me. I never doubted you, and when I finally came face to face with my decision to punish you, I found that I couldn't. Your phone call was only the confirmation to something I had already known." Tom listened and felt only sadness. He had never considered anybody else's side in all of this. He was angry at Harris for manipulating Nikki with information he had about work, and he had never told Nikki of his long-range plans. But he had to admit that if she had known what he was doing, none of this had to happen, and Harris would still be alive because he would never have been able to use that information. "What do we do now? I know that I should never have left you without giving you the opportunity to tell me your side of everything. I should never have divorced you and taken our children. I know that now, but can you ever forgive me?" Nikki looked down at the table and then back up to Tom. She had learned to face everything head-on as part of her recovery, and she would not stop now. "I don't know what will happen. I forgave you a long time ago. It was necessary that I accept my responsibility in everything that happened, and I was able to move forward. Now that my sons are back, I can learn to be happy again. If I can learn to be happy, maybe we can learn to love and trust each other again. I'm willing to try." Tom smiled at her and said, "That's all I can ask for." All of the decisions had been made, the movers contacted, the flat sold, and the turnover in management locally made. It had all been done on schedule and with time to spare. He had spoken with the boys' teachers, and their records had all been transferred. They were good students, and the teachers had all written glowing praise in their referrals. Since it had not been necessary for the boys to return, they were unable to say personal goodbyes, but Tom took all wishes with him to give to them later. He flew home at the end of the week, and Harry met him at the airport. He was to drive him to the new house in Saugus, close to the office. They had picked it out when he was here before, and the boys were a big help. They looked at several houses with their mother, and they decided on the one they finally purchased. It was beautiful and located on one of the many hills surrounding the valley. The view was outstanding, and that was what California was all about, view. He had flown back to Belgium the day after he and Nikki had discussed their future. The boys stayed with Betty and Harry, and Nikki stayed there as well. Her apartment was a single bedroom with no place for the boys. They had not discussed living arrangements, but as far as he was concerned, they would stay with him. Nikki could be with them as often as she wanted, and there was certainly room for her if she chose to stay there. When he got to the new house, he was surprised to find it already furnished and decorated. He was at a loss until he noticed that most of the furniture was from their home before their divorce. He had sold the home, but had left the furniture decisions up to Betty. She had apparently saved the good stuff. It was also clear that Nikki had done most of the work, the boys helping. They had done well. The boys were there, and they greeted him as he entered. They were quite proud of the accomplishments and waited for his approval. "The place looks great. It's good to see you boys, and I have lots of things from your classmates and teachers. They are in my briefcase, so why don't you grab them now? Thanks, Harry, for the lift. I'll be okay now since the car has been delivered and is in the garage. Want to stay for a drink?" "No thanks, Tom. I'll be heading home now. Will we see you this weekend? We could have a barbecue if you want. Might be fun." "Sounds good, Harry. I'll call tomorrow for times." He wandered through the house, looking into all of the rooms. He noticed that the master bedroom had huge walk-in closets for him, and her and the bathroom had both a garden tub and a shower. He had missed those things in the flat in Belgium. He walked into the closet and noticed some new shirts and slacks and some socks. Apparently, Betty or Nikki had decided he would need some things right away. He was pleased but sad. It would be lonely in this huge house with just the three of them. He looked into the other closet, thinking that he could store his suitcases and some of the other stuff left over from the move, and noticed that there were clothes on the hangers. He investigated further and found some underwear and lingerie and other women's things in the drawers. He became more and more curious and found more of the same in the bathroom. He hoped that meant what he thought it did, but how to be sure? He was trying to decide how to find out for sure when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "I hope you don't mind my using one of the closets? And I was planning on sharing the bed if you don't have any objections." He turned with a smile and said, "I have no objections. None at all." The end.